Creative Magic Club.
Hi everyone, welcome to this week's episode. I'm so excited to introduce our special guest today. We have with us Tenae Stewart, who is a practicing cottage witch, a certified astrologer, a coach, and a published author. She is on a mission to embody simplicity in magic, astrology, and self-care. She's the author of The Modern Witch's Guide to Magical Self-Care and The Modern Witch's Guide to Natural Magic. Her work empowers modern witches to nourish their minds, bodies, and intuition so they can be their most magical selves all day, every day. Hi, Tenae. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So, how did you get into astrology? What's your story?
Yeah, it's so funny because I was interested in astrology even as a kid. I remember always really resonating with my sign and things like that, but it's so funny. I don't know like exactly when, like what the moment was that I got into it as an adult. I know it was about 7 or 8 years ago. And I do know the first thing that really jumped out at me that was like immediately transformative was learning about my moon sign. And so I don't even know when I first got my chart or saw my chart for the first time, like it was just sort of lost in the mists, I guess. But I remember learning about my moon sign and just really feeling like it opened this door. It was like this new layer of understanding. I had always resonated with my sun sign, but it just felt like it wasn't the whole picture, which it's not, right? And learning about my moon sign was really this gateway for me to really discover so much more about myself, and that there were all these parts of me that had been kind of hidden or kind of pushed aside that were really there in my chart, like very strongly, in fact. And then from there, I learned about the rest of my chart, but the moon was really the first thing for me. And so the first readings that I offered years ago were moon sign readings, because I just felt like the moon was such a powerful place for people to start.
I love that. What is your sun, moon, and rising?
I have a Taurus sun, Aries moon, and Virgo rising.
Oh, I'm Virgo rising too.
Oh, awesome. I love that.
So I've never actually heard the term cottage witch. What is that?
Yeah, so basically cottage witchcraft or cottage magic is it means that the home, sanctuary, sacred space are really at the heart of someone's practice. It's a term that I came across many years ago, probably like definitely over 15 years ago at this point. And I remember when I came across it that it just felt like it described something that I hadn't been able to put into words before. I had like played around with kitchen witch and green witch and things like that, and they just never felt like they described everything. It didn't feel like those were the things that were really at the heart of my spirituality. And when I came across the term cottage witch, I'm not 100% sure where I came across it, although in retrospect, most likely there is a book by Ellen Dugan called Cottage Witchery, which in my research seems to be the first time that someone like put that in print. So maybe it was that book. It's a great book. But I remember coming across it and just feeling like, yes, like that's who I am. That describes my spiritual feeling and beliefs like much more so than any of the other terms I had come across. So for me, it's very Virgo in a lot of ways. It's very much about sacred space and having these like spaces where we can rest and recharge and connect and, be ourselves.
And so I'm presuming from this description that like creating beautiful space in your home is like a part of that practice.
Yeah, definitely. For me, it's a very seasonal practice. So I post a lot on my Instagram and things where, we change the house over for the seasons, and, it's just, and, my altar as well. But it's not just about like the individual, quote unquote, sacred spaces, right? It's like the whole house is really a sacred space or an altar of its own.
I love that. I always feel like the people who change their decorations and the different themes, I'm like, already just like maintaining a house on its own is like enough housework for me to deal with. I'm like, that just sounds like way too much. for my brain, but I can see how, yeah, I think a lot of that is also, our like being cultured in towards productivity. And so often the things that cultivate creativity and like cultivate emotion and presence, and, often these are ritualistic things that maybe aren't like quote unquote necessary in order to function, but they have, so many other values that when you create, ritual and kind of like moments on the calendar to bring those in, it really elevates your life in such a big way. I'm so curious kind of like how that has unfolded for you and what you would say, what are the ways that it benefits you to do that?
Yeah, no, that's so true. I think that, we have this idea in our society that we're kind of supposed to be the same, right? We're supposed to have the same level of energy and be the same person, every day of the year. And that's just not realistic. It's not true. It's not sustainable. And working with the seasons, which for me is very astrological as well, right? I really work with the astrological seasons, the sun moving through the zodiac, as well as the wheel of the year and the like seasonal celebrations, which are really one and the same thing in many ways. Working with those can really help you understand that we're all in our own cycles. We have different levels of energy at different times of the year, and for some people, for a lot of people, they have lower energy going into the fall and the winter when it's darker and colder. But that's not true for everybody. I have more energy in the fall. The summer is when I really have my lowest energy of the year. And I know that from many years of tracking it and paying attention to it and working with that energy. And so I think that's a huge part of working with the seasons, whether it's, changing your seasonal decorations or having, like seasonal celebrations or events or just cooking seasonally, whatever that looks like. It's really, really powerful in helping you step out of that like productivity space, right? And be like, being productive means something different in every phase of the cycle, which we see reflected in the zodiac. We see it reflected in the seasons. We see it reflected in the moon phases. Like all these different cycles kind of eventually tell us the same thing, that we're not meant to be exactly the same all month long, all year long, all throughout our lives.
Yeah, totally. It's been interesting for me this year because we just moved from New York to LA. And so even though, there is a seasons change and there is like a slight dip in temperature, we don't have like the trees with leaves that are dying around this time of year. Like it's not as drastic. So it's been really interesting for me to notice in myself, even though, I still go outside and it's like hot and sunny during the day, even just like having the colder temperatures at night, like really noticing that internal change of season happening for me. Like, I mean, I just had COVID, but before that I had a cold, even though like my usual association with getting a cold is like, oh, well, it's cold weather outside. So like, that's why I got a cold. But just noticing the feeling of like moving into winter, even though it doesn't look like winter outside, and the new environment that I'm living in, and just honoring that I've been really feeling pulled to just like retreating and hibernating and kind of like clearing my schedule up and not being that outgoing. And hey, I have a really exciting new free series that I want to make sure you know about. It's called Sign Soulmate Clients with Astrology. And I created this because when I work with clients using their astrology charts, they stop trying to sell offers in a way that feels like pushing a boulder up a hill. They start selling what they're really excited to offer. They raise their rates, often doubling them. And soulmate clients start showing up more quickly and easily than ever, which is why I'm so thrilled to share this special 3-part training series with you to show you how to read specific parts of your chart to cut the drama of overthinking your storytelling and your prices, and cut straight to the actions and insights that lead to signing soulmate clients consistently with ease month after month. So when you sign up, you're going to get instant access to video number 1, which is all about signing soulmate clients by selling from your sun sign. Video number 2 is about tapping into your sales flow through your second house. And video number 3 is going to show you how to create your unique ritual for consistent clients and money flow. You don't need to know anything more than your birth time, date, and place, and I will show you what you need to know about your birth chart. This is for anyone looking to create a more consistent flow of sales from soulmate clients. And you can find this by going to my website withsarahmac.com under the freebies tab, or by the link in my bio on my social channels. I'm curious if do you work with clients in both hemispheres in like different climates and temperatures? Like, do you kind of like see any trends that kind of like span across different environments, or are we always, very influenced by the environments that we're in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the majority of my clients are in North America and Europe, although I do have some Southern Hemisphere clients. And what's interesting with the Southern Hemisphere, if you are practicing like the Wheel of the Year, and the, new and full moons in different zodiac signs throughout the year, is all of it is it's essentially the same, it's just reversed, right? And so like we have Samhain in October, Halloween in the Northern Hemisphere. At the exact same time in the Southern Hemisphere, they're celebrating Beltane, which is the opposite, right? It's about the height of spring versus the like depths of fall, right? But they are both on the Taurus Scorpio axis. And so the astrology actually really helps us kind of like see where those universal threads are. So, at Samhain, it's close to the new moon in Scorpio and the full moon in Taurus. In the Southern Hemisphere, Beltane is close to both of those. And they're reversed, at the opposite ends of the year. So for us in the Northern Hemisphere, Beltane is close to the new moon in Taurus and the full moon in Scorpio. And so there's always these like correlations that I think can be really equalizing in a lot of ways, because they help us see like what is universal, or, there's not a lot in the world that's universal, but there are some threads of that. So I think that can be really helpful in saying like, okay, no matter where I am, no matter, where I live, no matter where my ancestors lived, right, there are these universal threads of the seasons and of the zodiac. And at the same time, I also think that our own chart, I teach a lot about like our rising sign having to do with our relationship with the seasons. And so our own chart can, definitely influence like how we experience the seasons wherever we are. And I think that our own environment and climate can definitely, absolutely have an impact on that, right? Like someone who, like I've had clients who, based on their charts, like I would think like, yeah, you might have more energy in the winter. And they're like, oh, no, like, winter is not my time. And they live somewhere where, they only get a few hours of daylight. And it's like, okay, well, that makes sense, right? Like you have an environmental factor as well, which I think is really important, right? Is that we marry like the astrology and these like really amazing cosmic systems with the practical reality of like, where does someone live? What is their relationship or their experience of a given season, right? Like fall is definitely when I have more energy again, and like I'm excited about doing things again. And I also have some really like major trauma in my past that happened in the fall. And so that comes up too. And so it's really important that we like understand how complex we are, and that we're in our own cycles, and that those cycles can change at different times in our lives. And so I think that there are these like threads of universality when we're talking about these systems that we all experience. We also all experience them in our own ways.
I love that. I'm curious what you would look for in a chart to suggest that somebody might have more energy in the winter.
Yeah. So theoretically, people who have anywhere from like Virgo to Capricorn, Aquarius rising, that when the sun reaches that part of their chart, that's going to be reaching their first house. And in a like quote unquote natural chart, the spring equinox occurs in the first house. And so the idea is that when the sun reaches that part of your chart, it's this like new beginning, a fresh start for you, or like your own personal spring. And I find it to be true for a lot of people. The one major part I find that can shift that just within the chart is a lot of times people who have their like sun or their Venus or something like that, some, really like energized, really like uplifting part of the chart in the couple of houses before the first house, they might find that that part of the chart that a lot of us experience as this like lower energy, very restful kind of time, they might experience that differently. So, layering in your planets, of course, always makes things more personal. But in general, I find that when the sun reaches your rising sign, we tend to have this like renewed energy.
That's so interesting. So you mentioned that looking at your moon placement really was kind of revolutionary for you. I'm so curious, like what are some of the elements that looking at that placement really brought to light and kind of changed the way you live and relate to yourself?
Yeah. Well, so my moon is in Aries and it's in the 8th house. And I have a lot of other planets there as well, but I first learned about my moon. And as I mentioned, I first offered moon sign readings. That was the first kind of reading I ever did. And I still talk so much about the moon in the chart, especially in the work that I do around self-care. And I always talk about, all these systems and tools and things that I've developed over the years for my clients. I originally developed for myself. And that definitely started with the moon. So learning first that my moon was in Aries, I have a Taurus sun, but it's right on the cusp, like it's 0 degrees of Taurus. And so, like most cusp babies, I always kind of felt like I resonated with both, more Taurus, but half of the horoscopes you would read would say I was an Aries, right? And so that was like, oh, okay, well, this makes sense, right? This actually is a really important part of me, which is true for many people born on the cusp, is that they have another planet or the moon or something in that other sign. And so that was very validating first, right? To be like, okay, here's like a bigger picture that I can kind of wrap my head around. But it also, reading about the moon in Aries, was both very validating and like kind of triggering, because I was like, these are parts of me that I'm not really fond of, that people have always told me are not great. I can be kind of temperamental, I can be kind of hot-headed, and like these are things that I've tried to not be all my life, right? And then failed to not be them, right? And so that was very like something that I had to really dig into and really do a lot of shadow work around, which I think is one of the beautiful things about the astrology chart, is it can really help you with this like self-acceptance of like, this is who I am, right? I don't have to change it. And I can, lean into my chart in a healthy way, but I don't have to do anything about it, right? It doesn't have to be something that needs to be fixed, right? And then the next layer of that was learning that my moon is in the 8th house, which I think learning that was what really helped me like accept the Aries energy and the Aries themes, because I had felt so resistant to them. And it also felt like, okay, yes, like I have this Aries energy, definitely, but it doesn't feel like, it still didn't feel like the whole picture, right? It felt like there's still something deeper than that, though. There's still something else. And learning about the 8th house and the connection to magic and to spirituality and to shadow was really, really empowering, to sort of understand that like depth that was there as well. And so the moon sign and house, I definitely teach, can be a really important part of the chart to not only understand yourself, but also really understand like what you need in order to feel safe, in order to feel nourished, and how to really give those to yourself, right? Because we can't expect that we're only going to get those from outside sources.
So is it mainly the moon that you look at when it comes to developing self-care practices, or are there any other parts of the chart that you look at as well?
Yeah, so I like to look at the sun and rising signs, and the sun house, because I find that those, kind of big three together, they're not the whole chart, but they are kind of like the core essence of who we are as individuals. And so the moon to me is, what we really need in order to feel safe and cared for. But the sun is what makes us happy. The rising or ascendant is still an important part of who we are. So I definitely look at those kind of three together. And then I also really like to look to Ceres, which is the asteroid of self-care. And she's a really interesting part of the chart because she represents, similar things as the moon, what we need in order to feel nourished and, mothered, taken care of. But she also represents what we need in times of grief or in times of challenge, because Ceres has a strong connection to this theme of grief and loss, which I think often gets overlooked in self-care, right? We often talk about self-care as like preventative, right? Which is good. Like we should be taking care of ourselves when things are good. But our self-care practices, our spiritual practices, like tend to go out the window when things are hard. Like it's the first thing to go, when in reality, it's the times we need them most. And so Ceres can be a really helpful part of the chart for that, to help us understand, like, okay, how can I keep taking care of myself even when things are really difficult?
Love that. I'm so curious to go and check out my series now. I haven't looked into that. Cool. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. So interesting. And I'm sure people are curious about learning more about how they can translate their astrology chart into self-care practices. So yeah, tell people like, where can they find you? What have you got going on?
Yeah. So if you're interested in these specific topics, like learning about your moon and Ceres and all of that, then I would definitely recommend check out my first book, which is The Modern Witch's Guide to Magical Self-Care. There's one whole chapter just on learning about your astrology for self-care. And it really walks you through creating practices that are right for you, that you can be consistent with. So that's a really good intro to me and everything I do. But you can also find me on my website, is witchoflupinhollow.com. And you can find all of my books and everything else I do there. I have a membership where I support people on more of an ongoing basis in, knowing where you are in your lunar cycles and your seasonal cycles and all that good stuff.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming and sharing. And thank you everybody for listening. Please share this with a friend who you know would love it, and go and leave us a review to help more people get know about this amazing podcast and content. And we'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us, Tenae.
Thank you.
Bye.
For more inspirational content, head over to my website withsarahmac.com, and please support the show by liking, commenting, and subscribing.